They came to change the rulebook to make global taxes fairer. And after a decade of work, a new deal was finally signed, the biggest shake-up to who pays what and where in 100 years. For tax havens like Ireland, where many companies have set up headquarters, this could be hard news, with tech giants like Apple, Facebook and Amazon now forced to pay a minimum global tax rate of at least 15%.
Today, after years of discussion, G7 finance ministers have reached a historic agreement to reform the global tax system, to make it fit for the global digital age, but crucially to make sure that it's fair, so that the right companies pay the right tax in the right places, and that's a huge prize for British taxpayers.
For too long, there has been a global race to the bottom in corporate taxes, where countries compete by lowering their tax rates instead of the well-being of their citizens and natural environments. The G7 has taken significant steps this weekend to end the existing harmful dynamic.
Today's deal will mean a global tax rate of at least 15%, which will stop multinationals from paying little or no tax in countries where they make money. At the moment, some estimates put the effective global tax rate paid by the likes of Facebook and Amazon closer to 10%. Every year, it's estimated that more than £300 billion is lost through tax avoidance, and this deal could see £194 billion raised worldwide, with as much as £11 billion coming back to the UK. The two-day G7 meeting saw finance ministers reach a deal that has eluded leaders for years. But with the Biden administration looking to raise corporation tax at home, the US position shifted closer to European demands, accepting that big companies need to pay tax in the places they do business. But campaigners say the proposal still falls short, with benefits directed at richer countries.
This is a crucial part of a shift towards corporate tax justice, setting the idea that we can have a minimum effective tax rate globally and require all multinationals to meet that is incredibly powerful. And it's a narrative shift to end the race to the bottom that we've been pushing for about 20 years. So this is a big moment. But now it's about getting it right, making sure that the benefits are shared equally, especially with the lower income countries that already lose the biggest share of their tax revenues to this kind of corporate tax abuse. And what the G7 and the OECD have put on the table today is the opposite of that. It would see the G7 take the lion's share of the benefits and leave very little for lower income countries.
As always, when it comes to tax, the devil will be in the detail. G20 leaders will be asked to sign up next month, but right now, companies and campaigners will be furiously working out who the winners and losers are, and whether this historic moment has served everyone fairly.
Well, earlier I spoke to Dr. George Dibb, who's head of the Centre for Economic Justice at the IPPR think tank. I began by asking him the significance of today's development.
This is a major moment for tax justice around the world, and we should all welcome this major agreement from the G7 today. And this is the beginning of a long road in terms of the negotiations. This has got to move now from the G7 to the G20 and further negotiation at the OECD. But it is a major milestone just getting these economies on board, because this is a collective action problem which requires the largest economies to move first. Around the world, though, this will also lead to a much fairer tax system, both for developed and developing nations. We've seen some progress on Pillar 1, which is the rule on where companies are taxed. And that means that now there is global agreement which says that companies should be taxed more where those companies incur their revenues, i.e. where those multinational giants actually make their sales. That would be beneficial for the developing world, because lots of those companies, the Apples, the Amazons of the world, aren't based in developing nations, but they may sell there. So that means that more of that tax revenue will go to the developing world.
What about the losers? How are Cyprus and Ireland likely to respond?
I think it's to be expected that those countries who are currently operating with corporation taxes lower than that globally agreed minimum will not be really happy about this. But I think that the message it sends is really strong. The operating model of those countries acting as tax havens is just not acceptable in the interlinked global economy. And what the G7 have done today is called time on that. There was figures released this week by the Fair Tax Foundation, which showed that a Microsoft subsidiary channeled £222 billion through Ireland and paid not a penny of corporation tax. That's 3/4 of the entire Irish economy. This system cannot be allowed to continue because those countries that are operating as tax havens are skewing and distorting the global tax system.
Of course, there are UK territories that operate as tax havens. Where does this leave them?
Yes, it will mean that those territories and dependencies either will have to cease acting as tax havens or other countries around the world will claw back those additional tax revenues. But fundamentally, what the meeting today and the agreement today has shown is that that model of economic development is just no longer acceptable.
Ultimately, what is this going to mean for ordinary citizens? Does this translate to more money in our economy?
The projections that we published at IPPR this week show that the global minimum corporation tax would raise an additional £14.7 billion every year if it's set at 21%. That would more than pay for our proposed reforms to the health and social care system, for example. But more importantly than that, citizens will benefit from a fairer tax system. As long as global multinational companies are able to undercut SMEs and high street firms, then we have a skewed economy. If we remedy that system by having a fairer system of tax, it means that investment, innovation and risk-taking will be fairly rewarded.
George Dibb, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.